sometimes the hardest part of leadership is resisting the urge to just go in and fix it yourself. Do you call the person that's responsible for that system, or do you start digging into the system yourself? Do you literally start doing the investigation instead of picking up the phone or firing up Teams and just asking some questions? I think there's a little bit of a negotiation there of what you're going to keep a handle on and what you're going to let go of.
If you're ready to unlock momentum, you're in the right place. I'm Aaron Kopel, the Momentum Locksmith, and this is where CIOs come to grow. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Unlocking Momentum. I'm your host, as usual, Aaron Kopel, and very excited for our guest today, Michael Koluch. And so Michael is with Arlington Row. He's the Vice President of IT Strategy and Operations, and very excited to have him on the show to share some perspective here. Michael, I would love to hear a bit about your background. How did you become a person who, outside of IT, came into this sort of IT leadership role?
Sure. It's always interesting because I always had this perspective that career pathing was linear, that I would do these things in this order and I would reach this career. And things don't always work out that way. For some folks, they do, but for me, it didn't quite take that journey. I originally started going to college to become a counselor. That was my trajectory, but I found a lot of enjoyment in working in higher education. I worked at Ball State while I was in grad school. I really enjoyed that experience and learned that, hey, you can work in higher education as a career. So I went on and did that for 16 years. I had a variety of roles surrounding student enrichment programs, rec programs, student engagement and leadership, cultural enrichment programs, overseeing facilities, working on student conduct, doing a lot of administrative and management work. And about 16 years, I started thinking about doing a career change. I thought, well, 40 seemed like a good time to change careers, right? But I felt I had kind of run my course in higher education. I had done what I wanted to do, and it was a wonderful experience. So many great people I met and worked with that were my colleagues, but not to mention all the students I had the privilege to work with. And they had a significant impact on my life, and I hope I had impact on them as well. Just a very rewarding experience. But I felt like I had kind of done what I needed to do in that career and was looking for something different. And I would love to tell you that, again, it was linear. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and it was IT, and I was going to jump in. But I was a little all over the place. I was thinking, maybe I'll be a small business owner, do some consulting work. I was thinking about becoming an airplane mechanic. I mean, I was really, really opening up the perspective of taking anything. But I've always been intrigued by IT. I wasn't building computers when I was younger. I wasn't that productive, but I always enjoyed this concept of how do we find technological solutions to some of our challenges, whether that's an efficiency challenge or a data challenge. And I love tinkering with that. And I thought, well, let's look into this a little more closely to see if this might be a good fit. And I think it was. So I started at Arlington Row at the help desk at an entry-level position. It was great. They took a little bit of a risk on me. I mean, yes, I was bringing in a lot of past experience, but not a lot of technical experience. So I'm really appreciative of that opportunity. And then also the ways I was able to kind of contribute moving forward. And once I started in IT at that level 1 help desk, and I got kind of my feet under me from a technical perspective and understanding the team and the operation, I started to look for ways I could contribute to the team. We have a wonderful team here. I had so many amazing colleagues that were very patient with me and were willing to teach and bring me into IT and helping me understand what I couldn't learn from YouTube videos or online or any of the certifications I took, really giving me that real world perspective. But I did see that there were opportunities where they needed help, where they had some very good, perhaps technical understanding, and they knew where they wanted to go and what they needed to do, but they had some roadblocks. And I realized quickly that I could help with those roadblocks. I could bring, that managerial, organizational perspective, that project management look to what they were trying to accomplish, and help build out a plan and do some of the communication and the training and the development and the scoping that really helped us put the pieces together to begin to move things forward. And I think it's those partnerships that really led me where I was today. I think I built some great partnerships in doing that. And that's really where things just kept rolling and where I am today, and now really focused on, hey, how do we align all that we want to do from an IT perspective with what we want to do as a business? So that's my story. It's been a great journey, and I work for a wonderful company with a great team, and I wouldn't be here without them, but it's really that partnership.
Partnership is big in IT, especially from a leadership perspective. And I imagine you sort of come full circle back around to some of that counselor kind of thinking, right? So
Often.
yeah, pulling everyone together, and there's a lot of teamwork, a lot of partnership there, and really making things effective. And that's what we hear a lot from IT leaders is it's less about the tech. That's the easy part. A lot of times it's more about the people and getting alignment and understanding and really getting everyone on the same page.
A lot of it too is how do you use those skills and those leadership skills to build your teams and to bring the best out of the individuals that you're working with. I always felt like that was dismissing them maybe in a way and bringing those to the forefront. Maybe we need to get rid of that just calling them soft skills because they're skills, period. You can teach them. Some people absorb them faster than others, but they're a skill set that, we need to build and garner.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, and a lot of it comes with self-awareness, I think, too. And so it sounds like you got it, a lot of that, and just really being able to understand like what are those things we bring to the table beyond just the obvious technical stuff that we need, and bringing that all together as a group and a team. So that's great. Well, and along that note, one of the things we usually talk about here is that journey to where you are now, but looking back on your career and everything, what's a piece of advice you might give your younger self to make life a little bit easier?
I tell this to my children all the time. If I could go back, it sounds so cliche when I say this. If I could go back, I would have tried harder in school. I didn't really engage and apply myself probably until I was in college, where I really started to think about, oh, well, that's probably important. I should probably focus on this. I mean, I could go into a variety of reasons why things are the way they are, but going back and being more methodical and not just trying harder, but also bringing in the perspective of it may take you a little longer to learn X, Y, or Z, and that's not a good or a bad thing, but sometimes it's just going to take longer for you to absorb and understand and build that perspective, and reminding myself that it's not going to come right away. It's not going to be immediate. You're going to have to work through these challenges, and that's going to set you up later because that's not going to go away. The learning should never stop. And we often believe that we're going to learn things faster than we do. Knowing what you don't know is always something that is a challenge. So that would be the advice to my younger self is engage, try harder, and understand that it's not going to be immediate. Be engaged, apply yourself. I think it would have made things much easier down the road.
Yeah, I can see that for myself as well. I was not certainly not an A student in high school. My kids and I were talking about grades. And I was like, I can't really remember what my grades were like in high school. So I made the mistake of actually ordering the transcript from my high school and having it sent home. And then I made the mistake of showing it to them. It was not good.
I want my transcript to stay where it was. I'm allowed to say it was a learning experience, and that was the only grade that mattered when I graduated high school, right? So that's what I'm going to go with.
Yep. So as we jump into the next part of the show, of course, our show is called Unlocking Momentum. So really curious to hear, a story from your background or maybe something that's going on right now. But really, as we think about it on this show, it's about unlocking momentum. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. But we find a lot of places where things are just stuck or we're trying to get to that next plateau and can't figure out how to break through. And so kind of curious for that story, like what comes to mind when you think about that unlocking momentum in your background?
A couple of years ago, I was promoted to the director of IT operations, and there was a lot of things that we wanted to do in IT. We wanted to transition to a new ITSM. We wanted to apply some management in areas we hadn't previously. We wanted to start looking at some different endpoint management solutions. We wanted to look at some on-prem migration to the cloud. We also had some telecom things we wanted to do. We were moving into a new office, and so just priorities everywhere. And getting through and deciding what are we going to work on when, what is the most important, how do we evaluate that, what are the different pieces we need to think about, do we have the right people in the right positions to make this happen, when do we want to do it, what are the fiscal implications, what are the end user implications through all these transitions. So how do you put all of this into a structure or a format that makes sense? And it's been something I've focused on is how do I take what is complex and seems unwieldy or nebulous and put it to some semblance of structure so we know what's expected, we know where we want to go, and we know what we want to work on. And I think going through that transition, I learned a lot about working through teams and leveraging their expertise, their perspective, taking all of that information, then working collectively to chart a course forward and making some very realistic and attainable goals. And I think that type of an experience kind of lens to these kind of 6 perspectives I want to share with you about what I was thinking about with unlocking momentum. I truly tried to be unique and not state the obvious or what other people say or what we see on different blog posts. I probably have overlapped in some of them, but I tried to be somewhat unique. The first one I've already started with, and that is the ability to identify priorities, which should be driven by your business goals. And really, that without direction, you're going to struggle. And there's always going to be something to fill your day. So if you have no priorities, that doesn't mean there's going to be no work. It just means you're going to have work, but you're not going to know if it's the quote unquote right work. So I sometimes think about Alice in Wonderland. If you think about Alice's interaction with the Cheshire Cat, right? She says, "Which way do I go from here?" And the cat says, "That depends on where do you want to go?" And Alice says, "I don't care where." And the cat says, "Well, then it doesn't matter where you go," right? So if you don't have that direction, you don't have that priority, it makes it really hard to plan and to have that forward momentum, because if everything is important, what is important, right? So you have to be able to identify those priorities and then have the discipline when something new comes up, as fervent as it might be brought to your desk. Do you bring it back to the priority? Do you bring it back to the business goal? And do you have that conversation? And that might not be no. It might not be yes, but it might be not now. So you're always going to have the work. The work's always going to be there, but is it the right work? And something I often say to my staff is, let's talk about your volume of work. Let's talk about the quality of your work, but let's also talk about, is it the right work? And by right work, I mean, is it the work that's consistent with our goals, consistent with our priorities? And if you put those 3 things together, you're going to see some momentum. So first one, priorities, and keep into those priorities. The second one has to do with the questions we ask. And sometimes it's about looking at a process, and we get into the weeds of the process, and we're trying to duplicate with technology exactly what that process is. But from an IT perspective, are we asking broader questions? Are we understanding the process and why the process is done? What are those data points? Where are they going? Does it have to happen in this sequence? Could we have that information entered a different way? Could it happen after the process? And I think you get the idea of where I'm going. But asking these broader questions, because sometimes, even in IT, if we're staring at a process and we've done it that way for quite a while, there's some good reasons why we do that process. But sometimes our lens is narrowed. It's narrowed to that process. Can IT bring something to the table where it provides a broader perspective and provides, insight into, hey, there's some solutions here where we could do this a completely different way that none of us have even thought of yet. So how does IT have those important, impactful conversations when it comes to doing, a project or a new initiative or a new build out? How are we asking those questions?
We're working with some organizations. We do a lot of AI transformation these days. And it is a lot of that, like understanding, like people are looking at the process they have currently and then trying to figure out how to use AI to replicate that. If you take a step back and start thinking about what's the outcome we're looking for, a lot of those steps were there because a person had to touch something or make a decision. And if you can automate that with AI in a different way, sometimes you can either skip those steps or maybe that whole process just doesn't even make sense. We can do it a completely different way that's easier. And so that's a beautiful one to take a step back and really ask the bigger questions and focus on outcomes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in insurance, we do a pretty good amount of emailing back and forth for a variety of reasons. And sometimes that's the default to the process is, how do we do this with email? And sometimes it's about, well, do we have to do it with email? And the answer might be, well, yes, because it's the easiest. Okay, so now let's start talking about phasing and iteration, right? So that do we start there, but really the goal is to do that outcome a different way later on. And I think we also have to be careful with asking these questions. It's somewhat delicate because we don't want to come across as contrarian or somebody that's slowing down the process or frustrating the process. You don't want the person to be defensive and saying, well, why are you asking so many questions about this process? I've been doing this for a while. I'm the expert. And they have a right to say that because they've been doing it for quite a while. So it's delicate. There's skill there. So we were talking about soft skills earlier and how we might want to get rid of that term, but you have to do it the right way. But I do believe asking the right questions bringing genuine curiosity, communicating that you are trying to understand, you are on their side, you do want to help them find the best solution possible, and helping them understand that by you having the most information in IT, you can advise in the best way possible. And kind of a follow-up to that, I'm asking my team to spend more time in the intake process of projects. What part of the process do we want to jump to? My experience has been the build process. Like, I don't want to spend time talking about it. I just want to start building stuff, right? Because that's the exciting part. Intake's not always the most exciting. For some of us, it might be, but it's not always the easiest. So I'm challenging them to intentionally spend more time on project intake and data gathering. What data flows through this process? How is it being used? What is the outcome? If you implement this, how do you know what the success is going to look like? How does the business partner that you're working with educate you on those success metrics? Because our success metrics might not be theirs. So how are you building that collectively? So that's the second one, asking the right question. Third, and I mentioned this earlier, is building complementary teams. And there's kind of two ways I'm looking at this. One is, bringing people to your team. I know, if you identify, I have a need for, more help desk support, or I need more networking work, whatever it might be. Yes, there's that ability to bring in people from the outside. But I think the first part is to have intentional conversations with your team. What do you know about their day-to-day? What do you know about their goals? What do you know about how they approach their work and how they feel about their work? And what I mean by feel about their work is, are they doing the work that they're passionate about and they're truly good at? Or are they trudging through things that aren't best suited for their skill set? And so sometimes unlocking that momentum is sometimes doing that for your staff too, is finding out, what are you really good at and passionate about, and where can you make an impact, and how do you build complementary teams from there? So start with your current team. And I think if you build that complementary team, it's going to make you much more effective when you need to roll out a project, so that you don't get stuck, say, in the communication space. You don't get stuck in the training space. You don't get stuck in the build and configure space. You're able to build that complementary team. And sometimes that also has to do with a third-party vendor as well. They can be part of that team too that you're trying to build out, where that third party can be a complement to the skill set that you already have. So really focus on unlocking those teams' capabilities. Fourth, progress over perfection. I think often, again, going back to that process example, there can't always be just one answer. And can we compromise along the way, where we can't get you everything that you're looking for in part one, but what could we deliver, and what does that look like? And we could easily get bogged down into duplicating the process one for one, end to end, and it may very well stall, and we simply won't be able to be effective. So I think you have to set a realistic bar. And I think for me, one of the things I try to do is to set that expectation. When I work with leadership, I often will say, we don't expect to solve everything, and especially everything at once, but we do expect meaningful progress over time. So we can show you progress, but it isn't going to be this one day IT is going to be done and everything's going to be automated. It doesn't exist. But we want to be with you to show that meaningful progress. That doesn't mean we're not aggressive and we don't have passion. We don't want to move forward. But I do think it does matter, what can we deliver now? What can we deliver later? And can we be iterative? And my experience has been the folks we work with are much more accepting of that than maybe we think. I've not run across a lot of situations where somebody says, well, if you can't do it exactly the way I want it, I don't want any of it. It may happen, but I think we need to think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yep. Yeah, showing progress there, be able to check with them, get feedback, make sure we're on the right path before we spend a year working on the wrong stuff, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Fifth one is keep the momentum. I'm inherently an impatient person. I think it helps with sustaining momentum. So I think realistic timelines, but also have this sense of urgency. I think we naturally excel when we have some resistance, when things are difficult. So how do you find that sweet spot with momentum, where you set timelines that are challenging, you have a sense of urgency, you hope it builds that momentum, you hope it builds that productivity and that challenge within your team. And once you find that balance, I think you can keep the momentum. And the last one is, was your strategy something you communicated at a meeting earlier this year and you haven't talked about since? And you have to bring it back to the forefront all the time. Now, I'm not a big fan of you start every single meeting reading your strategy. I don't know about that. But when you're talking about new initiatives, our current initiatives, when there are opportunities to connect it back to the priorities, to your strategic goals, grab that opportunity. Somebody brings you a new idea, connect it. You don't have to use the same language every time, from my perspective, but always be making that connection back. So that was a lot for unlocking momentum, but I think for me, going through that transition of all the things we wanted to prioritize and do in IT, these are the things I gleaned from that 6 perspectives. And they're things that I try to do with my team on a regular basis.
Oh, that's great. I tried to write them down, so let's see if I got them right. First one was focusing on priorities, then the right questions, then complementary teams, then progress over perfection, and then keeping the momentum really through like having the challenge, right? So not too easy, not too difficult, but finding that sweet spot to make sure that we can maintain that energy and momentum. That's great. And then last one, that communication of strategy. And that was really interesting. So if I think I had this in my book, there was a CIO worked at a very large credit card company probably 10, 15 years ago, but we were going through a company-wide agile transformation, big deal. And his sole job, we said, as the leader of the organization, like he had about 4,000 people reporting up to him altogether. And we kind of joked that his job was to walk the hallways and be like that doll with the string on its back where you pull a string and it just says the thing, right? And we said, the thing is, you got to tell us the why. Why are we doing this agile transformation? And so it's that communication of strategy and the why and sort of, what's that future look like? Super important, right? For senior leaders to just sort of maintain that focus. And it doesn't have to be the same words as you said every time, but that theme, right? So that people remember that, hey, this is important and we're doing this for a reason. And here's what that future looks like. And if you have questions, I'm here to answer them, that kind of stuff, right? So it wasn't to manage the day-to-day of IT and, make sure tasks were getting done. It was really leading, from that future vision standpoint and helping to understand the why. So it's great. Yeah, love it. Well, with that, I think that sort of plays into one of those key points you had, those 6 points. If you think about something that you would get up on the soapbox and want to talk about and take a stand on, what is that for you, Michael?
This is an interesting one. I'm relatively new to the field, so I feel humbled to be able to step on a soapbox. And I don't know if I grabbed the most dramatic soapbox moment, but I will say this. I do think as you progress from in your different roles and you take on more and more of a management or a leadership position, you have to learn to let go. So earlier in your career, your value was often directly connected to your output, which is very measurable. So it was closing tickets, or if you were a developer, it was writing code or fixing code. And that's what you did. You fixed, you did troubleshooting, you would dive into the details. And that's exciting. I'm sure for some, it elevates your heart rate a little bit. There's a little dopamine there, and it's exciting and it's fun. And it's not always going to be that way. It feels good to solve problems yourself, but being in leadership, it's a different game. Your job transitions to be about empowering others and building ownership of your teams and creating an environment where people are successful without you being in the weeds and in the middle of everything. You focus on creating ownership. And I've learned that while that is true, there's still some things I enjoy doing. There's projects I worked on or applications I was a part of. So I keep 1 or 2 things that I keep my hand in because it keeps me a little fresh in what's going on. And it also is that outlet for me that's a little fun. But for most things, I've had to learn to be comfortable in stepping back and letting others lead and own. And also look for my team to teach me things. So sometimes it's not just about, well, I have to go figure it out. Well, let the folks I work with show me their expertise and help me be better. So I think if you're new into management and leadership, the real challenge is how deep they go into the weeds. And if they're asking themselves why. And I don't want to pretend that this is an easy thing. And I think the hot take component of this is you really do need to let go. And I'm not naive to the fact that some folks might be saying, well, Michael, you're saying let go of this critical system that I've managed for years. And if it doesn't work right, we can't do business. You want me to just throw that to somebody else? No, I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not downplaying, the importance of ownership. However, if you are going to transition, there's no way you can do everything, despite what you think. Sometimes we want to believe that. And I think some folks in IT, we might get a little bit of a reputation for being control freaks and wanting to be part of everything and have our hands in everything and know everything. And how do you find that comfort level between that and what is your reaction when something doesn't go right? Do you call the person that's responsible for that system, or do you start digging into the system yourself? Do you literally start doing the investigation instead of picking up the phone or firing up Teams and just saying and asking some questions? It's so easy to go backwards and it's not really backwards, but to go back into what was comfortable. And so how do you find, and sometimes I think there's a little bit of a negotiation there of what you're going to keep a handle on and what you're going to let go of. And I think I would just sum this up to say, I think sometimes the hardest part of leadership is resisting the urge to just go in and fix it yourself.
It's a very good point, especially like you said, if you were part of the project or own that system before, as you start elevating into higher and higher leadership positions, it's a tough thing to stay out of that because you probably did take a lot of pride in that, right? Because you built it or you were part of it, saw that thing come to life, but you got to let it go. And to your point, it's not like let go, like, hey, take your hands off the wheel, close your eyes and hope for the best. It's put yourself in a position to be able to do that, right? You got to help someone else take it over and feel like they're going to be successful, right? You're still there maybe to answer questions or give some guidance, but the more you can let that go to empower someone else to take it, the better. And that's where a lot of leadership, these days becomes really much more about coaching and mentoring, right?
And they might actually end up doing it better than you, which is something that I've learned. Some of my favorite experiences are where I work on something and I build some type of automation and then somebody else takes it over and I run across it randomly and I'm looking at it going, I think I worked on this, but this is so much better than what I remember. or maybe they built some layering where they took that first iteration. Remember I was talking about don't let perfection be your enemy. They took that first part and said, hey, this is really good, but you know what, Michael, you forgot to build auditing functions with this where we can see how much it's being used and if it's making an impact. And hey, guess what? We built that. And I love seeing that. So maybe it's good. Maybe one of the outcomes of this is I should just say, you just need to learn to forget about things you've built and then you won't worry about them anymore. But there's always a chance that that person that takes ownership. I shouldn't say there's a chance. There's a very good chance that the person, when well trained, will take over that and do things and improve on what you built on.
Yeah, that's a good point. And business evolves as well, so there might be new needs that they discover or that come up. So yeah. That's great. Well, it's nice that those things still stick around. Like you built a good foundation. Now let's let others build on top of that and make it even better. That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, love that because that plays into a lot of what we talk about with leadership and really the role of management, really getting out of the weeds and be able to support and empower people, create the environment, as you said, for them to be successful. And that comes back to a lot of mindset shift towards coaching, mentoring, and really setting people up for success rather than jumping in and doing the work for yourself. Right. So great example there. Well, as we think about the future then, there's a lot of stuff going on. The world is moving faster and faster, it seems like. And so lots of opportunities to think about what that future could be like. And I used to ask questions about, what's the future look like 10 years from now? I don't know if any of us can think about that far in the future. Like the future seems like next week these days sometimes. But as you think about, the future and what CIOs really need to pay attention to be successful going forward, what comes to mind for you? Like is the most important thing for CIOs to pay attention to?
And thinking about this question, I couldn't help but I kept coming back to the same answer, which I think so many people have covered. And I'm sure on your podcast as well, I've listened to a lot of your sessions, but not all of them. And I think focusing, CIOs and strategy leaders, making sure that IT is truly part of the business conversation and not operating alongside it. And the way I look at that is positioning ourselves as integrated and not as an add-on. So what I mean by that is, for example, are you invited to meetings to update and report on IT, or are you already there? And it's not new to say, well, IT has to be at the table. We're used to having that conversation. It's not a new challenge. And we know all the drawbacks, right? You don't include IT. There might be wasted resources or cybersecurity concerns, or the solution may not be, may not work at scale. Like, hey, this solution you built for 4 people is not going to work with 300 or whatnot. So we know that there's some challenges there. But I think communicating these challenges, are only part of it. I don't think we can get on our soapbox and yell about, not literally yell, but there's only so much we can do with communicating. Bad things are going to happen, right? And I don't know that that paints us in the best picture. So rather, it's about how do we retool ourselves to have effective communication with strategy leaders. So we're not just talking technical conversations, but we're engaging them to understand goals and challenges. So kind of going back to what I talked about in what questions are we asking, this ties right into this. How are we engaging in those conversations? If we are invited to that meeting to update an IT, do we take that opportunity to update, but also ask some questions? And there's an art to that, and there's a need for skill there. And I think there's a growing need to have professionals who can bridge that gap. And I don't like the word translator. I've always not liked that because it's not that. It's not about how do I take technical jargon and communicate it better. That's part of it, but there's so much more to engaging folks in those conversations. So to sum up, the future, it's not about technology for technology's sake. And I think that's a big message with the excitement of AI right now. And we need to have it right now, but we don't know why, and we don't know what we want it to do. And yet there's an equal side of, hey, it is something we need to pay attention to, and we do need to integrate, but we have to have those conversations. How do we find solutions that intentionally support the business in a meaningful way? I certainly don't have all this figured out. I'm learning as we go. I think Arlington Rowe is learning as we go. We're a growing company, and with growth comes growing pains and technology in every aspect of our business. And I'm still working through that as well. But how does IT become integrated? Are we inside the conversation, and we're not that add-on? Hey, just what's IT working on? Come give us a project report. Well, take that opportunity to not just talk about where this project is, but talk about how this project is directly connected to a business outcome or a goal. And if you can't do that, I think there's some other conversations maybe to have before you even go into that meeting and give those updates.
So that's a really good point, and we see this a lot. I think a lot of organizations are moving in that direction. Maybe not fully there, but certainly moving that direction where we stop having this conversation about business versus IT, right? Sort of button heads all the time. And it becomes, at least IT as a business partner. If not, they're just part of the company, right? That's who we are. We're an integrated organization where all the different pieces of the puzzle come together, especially at the leadership team. And then that just sort of cascades down to the rest of the organization where we're all in it together, thinking about, outcomes and customer objectives and things like that, rather than all the behind the scenes stuff about how we make that happen. And then, working in our silos. A lot more organizations are moving in that direction, hopefully, where it is really more that integrated organization like you described. So that's great. Something we've been hearing for years, but I haven't seen a lot of organizations really do it fully. Like I said, I think they're going that direction of really helping that CIO become really a business person, right?
The operations is the word that I often think of, that there's a expertise in operations that can directly connect to what we do in IT. And I see, that isn't new per se, but I think there's a benefit of that of, hey, do you have, what operational knowledge do you have? Do you know what users do all day? Do you know what they do drives outcomes, and how well can you define it? And sometimes we know how they interact with our tools, but it may end there. So I think there's an operational lift to that as well. And I think you got to marry the two of those.
Yeah, I think modern organizations, especially as fast as things are going to be moving, and just they seem to get faster and faster every week. Really having that set up, right, where we're all in it together. We like to say not just rowing the same direction, but we're in the same boat rowing together. So that seems to help a lot. And it's an interesting visual to think about having that, especially like the C-level team, like all in there together, rowing in the same boat on the same cadence, like bumping shoulders and that kind of stuff, and being really in lockstep. So it's an amazing thing to see.
And I think we can't ignore the fact that those things don't often happen all at once, and you're going to have to be willing to have intentional developmental conversations with folks if they're not willing to put their oar in the water, or why not, do we understand? And then folks are going to have different cadences at different times, and how do you navigate that? And does somebody want to, I don't know how far you want to go with the metaphor, but does someone want to get off the boat And do you give them license to do that, right? And I think for our team, I believe we're moving, in concert in the right direction, and we just have to continue to make sure that we're doing that in concert with the business, and we're only going to do that by having some cohesivity and alignment. I hope I was going to make it through the whole podcast without saying the word alignment. So
it's a hard thing to do. It's such a good word.
It is. It's the new word.
Yeah, it's an important one these days. Like, we can go off running in a lot of different directions, and that alignment, it's a good word. Getting everyone on the same page and go in the same direction, and hopefully rowing together. So in alignment. Good stuff. Well, Michael, thanks so much for being on the show. It's really great to hear your perspective and some of the examples and stories that you shared, and some of those passions you have. And I love the 6 pieces of the puzzle there of unlocking momentum. So just to reiterate those for everyone: setting good priorities and focusing on those, asking the right questions, having complementary teams, progress over perfection. Love that one. Keeping the momentum by really making the work challenging but not impossible, not something too easy but not too hard, and trying to find that sweet spot. And then last, maybe most important, consistent communication of that strategy, right? And again, it doesn't have to be the exact same words every time, but it doesn't have to be reciting it at the end of or at the start of every meeting, but really maintaining some focus on that and communicating it more than just once, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Michael, it's been great to have you on the show. As we usually do on the show here, I want to end with some rapid fire questions to get to know you even better. And so the first one of those rapid fire questions is, what's your biggest passion outside of work?
Well, my wife would tell you I have way too many hobbies. I love to play and perform music. I play the saxophone. I love road biking, gardening, boating. I'm a very entry-level, minor audiophile, and I really just enjoy tinkering with things. I love to learn how things work. And then also, I hope that I learn enough that maybe I actually get to fix something that's broken. Sometimes we don't get to do that too often anymore. But I really do enjoy that. If you had to, though, make me pick something that I really enjoy, it would have to be gardening. I grow roses. That's my passion. It's really what I love to do. And that is a very fun thing to do, but it's also incredibly challenging. Anyone who grows roses in this part of the country knows it's a challenge. But I think the best part is resurrecting a plant that is struggling, or I think all of us are going after that perfect bloom. And I was lucky enough to be in the America Rose Society national calendar. It was a small picture. I didn't get a whole month, but hey, I was still on there. So I'm very proud of that. But it's something I truly enjoy. And I think while it is a challenge, what would be the point of gardening if you didn't have to go out there and tend the garden?
That's really cool. I'm sure it's a meticulous thing, but it's probably very rewarding when you get that, like you said, that perfect bloom, or resurrect that plant that everyone else thought was gone and you brought it back to life. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Lots of parallels there. That's great. So next one of our rapid fire questions. If you could have a coffee with anyone alive or dead, you have a good chat, get to learn from them, know them better, who would it be?
This is a great question, and I had all sorts of ideas for how I was going to answer this, So I could probably give more than one, but I'm going to pick my favorite. So I'm going to pick Teddy Roosevelt. It might be a little cliche. I know that. I think we all love the man in the arena quote, but thematically, I love that. Effort matters, even when it's ugly. In this world of kind of instant gratification, we kind of lose the lessons of the struggle, right? Of really having to work through something when it isn't overly rewarding. And there's something to be said about being in that struggle. But I also pick him because I am mesmerized by people who excel and achieve when they have every reason to give up. And this is a person who, had a lot of tragedy in life, struggled with asthma, I believe. And despite all of that, becomes president, just has this incredible thirst for life, has reasons to be bitter and to give up, but just keeps going and is just this transformational, inspirational figure. And I can only imagine what that conversation would be like, the insights that could be gained, the perspectives that could be gained, and also just learning about this, being able to see the world in this very adventurous frame of mind, which he would have had at the time. So I think that would be an exceptionally interesting conversation.
I love TR. I've read, both those biographies that are like this thick about him, Theodore Rex, and it's really interesting stuff. He's one of my favorites as well. But yeah, like overcoming a lot of challenges, but he's just a lifelong learner is a big one, and just super energetic. Like if you read that book about him, just like, strutting around the streets of New York as the, I think it was like police chief for a while, and just like out in the middle of the night, just like, walking through the streets, and you have to run to keep up with him walking. It's crazy.
And we're separated by such a long period of time, but yet you read those books and you get excited. You are motivated, and that thirst for life, like you said, that curiosity as well. And I think there's a lot of what we can learn and garner in our work from his work, and bringing that sense of curiosity, that sense of adventure, into what we do.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, that's a great one. I love that. Like he's definitely in my top few that I would pick as well. So super interesting character. So awesome. All right. Well, last one of our rapid fire questions here. This is more about legacy. So we usually ask it as, what would you want to be remembered for? Or what would you like to have on your tombstone?
So when I read this question the first time, I'm embarrassed to say the first thing that popped into my head was the Tombstone pizza commercial, which is like, what do you want in your tombstone? I couldn't not think about that. But a little grim, but a very good question. And I think for me, 100% being a good husband and a good father and a good parent, I think is the number one thing. I think when all things are said and done, whatever I did in my career, I think are going to pale in comparison to that. So I hope when I am gone, the world is a little better place from how I found it. I hope I learned from those around me, from my parents and all the people I've come in contact with, and I've been able to share that with my children, and they're able to have what they need to meet the world. Give them roots, give them wings, and I hope if I've done that, they're going to be ready to meet the world. And if I've done it well, I've done some good.
That's a great one. And it's interesting because I don't think I've had anyone on here say that they want to be remembered for being on time and on budget on their projects yet.
Sometimes that leads to some good things.
But it's probably not that lifelong goal, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if someone told me this or if I read it or I heard it, but the idea that when they were leaving work, they said to their coworker, hey, just so you know, when you die, your inbox will still be full. There's no goal here of really getting to zero, right? And those things that last are, I think, elusive. I don't know that we can always define them and categorize them and put them in an Excel spreadsheet. I had someone once tell me, I'll measure my life by how many people come to my funeral. And I don't know that that's the best measure, right? Because you may have had influence on people that you have no idea. And maybe that person doesn't even know. That sometimes we've learned from people and we didn't even know we learned. And maybe we learned later or previously and we've since forgotten. So we don't always know, and we can't always be so factual about that to count people. So you just hope and pray that in the end, you left the world better than how you found it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Michael. And great to have you on the show. And I know people are going to find a lot of value in what we talked about. And I'm sure they'll want to reach out, maybe have a virtual coffee or a real coffee if they're local here. But what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Go ahead and just look for me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I'd be happy to connect and have the coffee.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. And then, of course, you're a learner. You talked about lifelong learning here, and Teddy Roosevelt, one of my favorites, who's definitely a lifelong learner. What are some things that you'd like to share in terms of books, podcasts, things that people should be paying attention to out there?
I am new to podcasts, so I'm just starting to dive into those. I do listen to Modern CTO. There's a very popular podcast. I love to listen to. I mentioned doing road biking. That is what I listen to when I road bike. Is a macro perspective of IT, mostly larger corporations, but the perspectives there are very interesting. And I think regardless of your business size, and you can gain a lot from that. So I really enjoy that. Ingrain AI is a great book. I recommend folks check that book out. I think John Munsell is the author of that. The AI-Driven Leader, I cannot remember the author, which is terrible. I should probably remember what that is. And I just started reading a book called Extreme Ownership. I just started reading that, a very interesting perspective of taking some gentlemen who are Navy SEALs and how they marry their experiences in the military with business. And it's just an interesting way of looking at both experiences and really gaining some insight. So I've enjoyed that book. I just started reading that a couple weeks ago, and I think it's been out for quite a while. So I'll give you those three: the AI-Driven Leader, Ingrain AI, and then Extreme Ownership.
That's great. Well, one new one for me, I listened to the AI-Driven Leader and Extreme Ownership. I think I had a flight to Europe late last year and did that on audio. Extreme Ownership, good one. Right.
Yeah,
Lots of good military examples, but they really do a good job of relating it back to business and sort of corporate strategy and things like that as well. So really good stuff. Yeah, well, thanks for that. Some good things for us to dig into. So again, thanks for being on the show, Michael. Really appreciate it, and have a great time out there.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking Momentum. If today's conversation sparked ideas or gave you a new way to think about leadership, check out our past episodes and resources. Don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you'd like to connect with me, Aaron Kopel, the Momentum Locksmith, you'll find the link in the show notes.